Welcome everybody to this week's Higher Education User Group. I am Kathy Lukeman. I work at Maryville University. I'm the user group leader. I am so excited. I was saying this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, Salesforce to SEVIS for international student recruitment. I'm excited to have Gavin and Chris join us today to show us their awesome work. I'm going to switch the screen over first to Gavin, and Gavin, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and Chris and get us started.
Certainly. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for having us. My name is Gavin Brito. I am a former Salesforce administrator for Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. I am now the founder of Clarity Cloud, and Chris Yao, my colleague, is an independent consultant who has been the brains behind my vision to bring this product to the market for higher education. Chris can give you more technical detail about the product, but the domain expertise came from the users of the higher education sprint in Orlando, and the buzz from Orlando continued on to like even past the sprint to the Denver sprint, where we got to refine the use cases of the product. And we are really excited to bring this to you, especially because it's a time where there's a lot of interest in studying in the United States. So without further ado, everyone likes stories. So I'd like to start off with a story. I am of Sri Lankan descent. I immigrated to the United States with a vision to not just study here and take advantage of an amazing educational system, but also to give back. And here I have two of my idols. And Elon Musk, also a transfer student to the University of Pennsylvania. He's a household name to most of you. Definitely revolutionized the American economy. Also, Sundar Pichai, initial F1 student, University of Pennsylvania, CEO of Google. So international students not only do they bring $39 billion in revenue per year to universities, they also give back to our economy. And the challenge that we are trying to fight today or overcome is the 7% decline in international student enrollment. So how can we make international student enrollment and recruitment and enrollment so streamlined that America can become an attractive nation for international students? So I have some functional requirements that I gathered from conversing with other universities that I met throughout the sprints and at user groups. So I'm not going to read these functional requirements that an admission rep does, because many of you know what they are. I have put the slides in the folder for those of you who attended the sprint. If you need me to send you these slides, I'll be happy to send them to you. My email will be at the end of the presentation, so feel free to reach out to me. I have functional requirements for an admissions director, admissions rep, a PDSO, a DSO, and once you put all of them together, we have these three swim lanes. And the first swim lane on your left is your Drupal site or your form assembly page for inquiries. Or if you're really advanced, like Maryville is, you will have Easy, the Salesforce community, and all the information that an international student needs will live there. The checklist will live there, and then in the middle is Salesforce, your backend, all the contacts, affiliations, relationships to that student. For example, a student who's coming in for the first time will have to fill out an initial F1. The school will have to fill out an initial F1 to get the I-20. And they have to go to the embassy to get their visa, the F1 visa. And then if they're bringing their kids, their wife, they need an F2 visa, right? So that all that is paperwork, and paperwork can get lost. And here you see the admissions rep is keeping tabs on 4 different tasks. The admission support, some universities have a support rep for the admissions for the back office paperwork. This school that we were interviewing had one. They had an assistant director and a director for admissions who also got in the mix, because there were so many pieces of the puzzle that were falling all over the place, especially if the student is a transfer student coming in, transferring their F1 from one university to another. There's also cases where students have a change of status. Their wife comes with them, or their husband comes to study. Comes to study, and their wife now wants to go from a dependent to an international student. And again, you have this you have to go through this process back and forth, and it creates a lot of chaos and a lag in getting the paperwork together. So the good news is life doesn't have to be that way. We sat down, put our heads together, saw what can be brought into the system. We found a way to put these different classifications, change of status, initial F1, transfers, into record types in Salesforce. We managed to take data from disparate objects in the affiliations, in the relationships, and provide a means to map those fields, like the relationship of a student to his spouse and his kids, into a I-20 object. And it may not seem intuitive, but when Chris gets into details about the product in his live demo, you'll see this will all come back 360. So why do we need to bring go ahead, question, affiliations? This solution does not require HEDA, but it is HEDA compatible. And we spoke very closely with the HEDA team, and they've blessed this product, and they've asked us to go ahead with it. They've given us visibility to their product roadmap. But even if you don't have HEDA, if you have target X with HEDA, it will still work. But thank you for that question.
If I could interrupt for a second there, Gavin, because the goal here in the technical design was this has to be basically architecture independent. Some schools may be running HEDA, some schools may not. Other schools may have their own proprietary system, or a third-party system involved, such as TargetX. My goal in designing the I-20 mapper, in addition to the XML export utility, was to make it as architecture independent as possible. So this way, no matter what custom objects you have in your environment, no matter how much you've defined it to your own specific needs, this solution can work for you.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, like Chris mentioned, we can bring any schema, map them from, it's data model agnostic, well said. It's data model agnostic. You can bring your accounts, your contacts, your relationships. There are multiple addresses, especially with international students. They have their home address in their country, then they have their dorm address. And when the address changes, guess what? The government needs to know. So how do you do that? You map this once and you save the mapping. So every time there's a change in the address, the system would go in, find the latest change in the last hour, and update the I-20 custom object, which would then go ahead and update SEVIS. So to give you detail on how the update happens from Salesforce to SEVIS, I'm going to hand over presenter access to Chris.
All right. Am I a presenter yet?
Go.
All right. Can everybody see my screen so far?
I can.
Excellent. All right. So there is the official way in which information is sent to the Department of Homeland Security regarding international students is via the SEVIS system. Now, the SEVIS system runs on a legacy XML type system. It basically uses these XML files. These are the data definition files, to kind of spare you the French here. You can see, for example, the start date, end date, whether or not it's a full or part-time student. This particular file here has 1,300 lines, and obviously this is the kind of thing that you're not going to be able to fill out on your own. The other alternative to using SEVIS, as I'm sure a lot of you are well aware, is you have to go through a form that's kind of similar to the DMV, where it's about 12 pages of just stuff. We've talked to some schools. What they usually do is they'll have all their I-20 information in Salesforce, but then they'll have to manually copy and paste it like this into whatever SEVIS web form there is. What we've come up with is a solution that we've kind of mapped the existing I-20 record that Department of Homeland Security requires into a Salesforce custom object for you here. As a sampling, this is basically just about a quarter of the expected fields, but it works for purposes of our demonstration. So you would see, for example, English proficiency is one checkbox, yes or no. All these fields here correspond to XML fields. So the field length, for example, the government would only give you 145 characters for the student's preferred name, so we've kept it to 145 there. By complying with this custom object standard, you would also comply with the XML standard for export, so we've made it a little easier there too. So the question is, how do you get all your contact information, for example, into this I-20 record? To that extent, we've created a mapper utility that can be used for a variety of functions in Salesforce. But in this specific example, your target object would be the new I-20 record we have created. And let's say, for example, there's an initial one-to-one relationship between an I-20 record and a contact record for every student in your CRM. So you select contact. Now, the benefit of this mapper tool as well is, usually in most cases, especially with HIDA, your contact information would be spread amongst several different objects in your environment. For example, for HIDA, you would have your affiliations up to your accounts and the like. So let's say, for example, you would have your primary academic program that's related to your contact. We would also have our primary department. In this case, you could see all these objects I'm registering all together. By registering different objects, let's say the contact's account, and let's say also the contact account's parent account. By registering all these objects together, you can use this utility to map them all to one I-20 record. So, for example, let's say that the billing address was equivalent to the account. If, let's say, the billing, the US address would be equivalent to the account's billing address, but the foreign address would be equivalent to the parent account's billing address. So we can go to US address city. We could say the contact accounts billing city, but then for the foreign address city, we could go to the contact account parent account billing city. So this way you can link from different objects, as long as there's a relationship between all of them, all onto the one target object, which is in this case the I-20 record. This lets you use HIDA. This lets you use any data architecture that may be in your environment to map easily all to one object. The other benefit to this as well is you can also use it to create standard reports. So for your I-20 object, even if it's going through several different objects and you need to map it down to one record, this one record here, you could just use a Salesforce standard report to represent it. You don't no longer need to have any sort of special reporting utilities or special report types that go over several different objects like that. Any questions about this mapper here so far?
Oh, I don't know if there's any questions. I'll ask folks to type questions in the chat window, but I know I'm in awe right now. This is awesome.
Yeah, so basically it lets you use standard reports. We've tried to make it as compatible with basic Salesforce as much as possible. The ideal situation in which this mapper would run is you would save all these fields just once, and as soon as the mapping is set up, it's just like a process builder. It'll just run silently in the background as a scheduled job, perhaps once per hour. It would update all your I-20 records based on if anything has changed in any of the target fields here. So after that, let's say everything's represented on an I-20 record. So in turn, the biggest problem we've run into from a technical design standpoint is Salesforce cannot interact directly with Department of Homeland Security to send them records. Department of Homeland Security mandates that any records must have, one, a paper copy available on your local site, and two, that actually electronically has to come from the physical location of your local site. So to that effect, what we've done is we've provided a way that the XML mapping that you see here it's basically hard-coded to the I-20 object, in that you can export then your I-20 record as XML. So all you would need to do then as well is just save it. Give it a second. You would just need to save this to your local file system. Save frame as. And then once it's saved to your local file system, we've written a quick transfer utility. Right now it's running on my Mac as OS X, but at this point it's pretty much open source because every school has their own IT department. Every school has their own way to do it. The actual transfer utility is fairly simple, but there's a number of different ways to implement it. And I'd be happy to look at a more global open source solution to help all the schools have something that best fits their particular schedule for file transfers and the like. But to give you an example here, I've got a sample script to upload the results. So this is just a simulation that's hitting my simulation endpoint. So it will upload the results, but then what would happen to SEVIS is it basically throws it onto a queue for processing. And later on, when the batch process comes back, it may have a result from the government. The Department of Homeland Security may have approved it. They may have denied it because, let's say, you're missing vital information such as a passport number and the like. This way, it's a two-way process because it will find a response and upload that response to Salesforce as well as part of the endpoint that we're including with this package. So as you can see, when I refresh this result, it's gone from draft to accepted because it was accepted by my fake endpoint there. So, but yeah, basically it's just a 1, 2, 3 process. So step 1, you would have to use the mapper to map to the I-20 record. Step 2, when you have your I-20 record, you would need to create an XML file and save that locally. And step 3, you transmit the file to Department of Homeland Security locally, get the result is already parsed and sent back into Salesforce for you.
Yeah, so now we know that there are competitors out there like Teradata and PeopleSoft and Ellucian that are already doing this. And we understand that there are desktop solutions for batching. What we the value add in going with this solution over a Teradata is your data is in Salesforce. You get your responses back into Salesforce, and you can build custom reports on your I-20 object. Run your standard reports on your I-20 object without needing to go to another third party like Conga Composer or anything else. Like you can schedule your I-20 reports and send it to your admissions team or to the admissions director. Or for example, on SEVIS applications that are pending. Like every day they get a scheduled report of all the pending SEVIS applications for review.
For one thing, it makes your data synchronization a lot easier because you no longer have to depend on an external system such as Ellucian to keep your student information there for admissions. But then for marketing, for admissions purposes, you also have a CRM database in Salesforce. It makes no sense to keep it in 2 different places. This way, it's all synchronized out of one place here. And if you need to direct further contact to the student, let's say if you get that result back from SEVIS the same day and that student needs an I-20 letter sent to him, you could send it right from Salesforce, assuming if you had a DocuSign integration, for example. You could draft your acceptance letter right in Salesforce, send it through DocuSign in Salesforce right away. It makes more sense in a lot of ways going forward to use Salesforce as your master record for everything going forward. This solution allows you to do so.
Correct.
So can I interrupt and ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
Yes, of course.
So I'm going to take us a step backward and then come back forward for a moment. When you talked about being able to schedule this, you said, I think you referenced it runs just like a process builder, and you could schedule this. Is there some, yes, can you give some guidance on that? Is there a tool that you're providing, or are you using something standard native in Salesforce for that?
Right now, we would be using something native in Salesforce to do it. To give you an example, under our setup here, in Salesforce already, you can run scheduled jobs. So under our Apex jobs, it would appear under the Apex jobs here as a scheduled job. Batch Apex, this is one example here, for example.
Right. And then when you said when the job runs, there is a response from SEVIS, from the
You mean the
job that
offline job on
ran.
your local file system here, correct?
Mm-hmm. But it also syncs back to Salesforce, so you can see the results
That's correct.
right on the exact record. So have you run into a situation yet where, or ever, where one file fails or one record fails, and so the whole job fails, or is it unique to each record what the result is?
It's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer at this time because we don't have a Department of Homeland Security sandbox to play with right now. We really need to work with a school as part of a beta program to get this up and running, to get it started. The problem is, since we're not a school right now, basically we're kind of locked out at a certain part of the development process because we don't have sample records. We're as a technical implementer, we need to actually partner with a school before DHS will even set up a proper endpoint for us to actually get specific government results back to test with. So
That's correct. So we've gotten very far, considering we are not a school, to get this product up to this point. And what our biggest ask during the last community sprint was to the schools to give us a shot and work with us, and we can then measure their existing process against this process and calculate the efficiency in the two processes and turn that into a Dreamforce presentation for the upcoming Dreamforce. So if not, a higher ed summit presentation for the next higher ed
or
summit.
both.
Or both, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Can we go back and look at the org for just a second so we can
Sure,
see the
which one?
You
want the mapper?
Well, I'd love to spend some time on this in a second, but I'm looking for the actual I-20 custom object detail
Sure,
page.
this one here. Keep in mind that this is only about a quarter of the actual fields that are required for the actual custom objects. So.
Okay, so that was going to be one of my questions, because you obviously have to have the fields there to be able to map to.
Correct, yes.
And I didn't know if you've already, it sounds to me that you did a really great job of dealing with all of the crazy field links and things like that we have to deal with some of these systems.
Right.
But
yeah,
I
basically broke down the file and started parsing out the XML in turn. So even little things like the foreign country prefix, it's 4 characters, and the country codes in particular. I know it's very picky as far as some of them go, but I will have built-in internal pick lists and constants for you to actually just do quick lookups in Salesforce, so you don't have to look at the tables or documents, PDF files to cross-reference that anymore. So.
Great, and I guess that's what I was asking, that do you have all of the fields documented and all of their requirements, and then it's just a matter of creating the fields on the custom object, or is this a solution that is installed? Because it looks like
you mean this custom
mapper
object?
is one thing, the custom object's another.
The custom object will be available probably as a managed package. That will just, you just install the custom object. Basically, the entire I-20 SEVIS integration is going to be, the mapper is going to be one managed package here that you would need to install, and the I-20 is the second one that you would need to install to go with the mapper. But all this stuff would basically come in a package, and you wouldn't need to go and set it up yourself, if that's the question.
That
was
good,
sorry.
No, it was a good question, because the HEDA team asked us the same question in Denver, and they said, how fast are you able to deploy a change if the Department of Homeland Security mandated 5 new fields? And the answer to that is yes, it will be, since we are a managed package, we'll be developing this as a managed package. We'll be able to deploy that in right away into your orgs.
And so I'm always leery of the term managed package, but I'm only leery when people change the purpose of standard objects. And so you're only introducing in your managed package the mapper and the custom object. You're not
Correct, yes.
changing in any way any standard object. Is that correct?
No, I have no desire to change any objects that are associated with HIDA or anything even that's a standard object such as a counter contact. That was my goal in making this data agnostic as well, because I've known the chaos that exists when you have managed fields on standard objects and you can no longer change them, and it just gets very hard to deal with. So,
thank you for understanding that. Another question you had referenced early on, and we saw those crazy swim lanes and all the touch points. The difference between kind of a new student and a transfer student and a dependent to a new student. And I think I heard you reference, maybe Gavin, you referenced record types. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. So since there are different flavors of an international student, and you want to still treat them as a student in Salesforce, the solution that I propose, and schools are welcome to challenge this solution, is to create three record create a record type for each kind of international student. Change of status will have a different set of fields, different validation rules, different criteria, because you're changing an F2 to an F1. Initial F1 has a completely different set of fields. Actually, that process is a lot longer because they're getting a F1 visa for the very first time, and there's a lot of checklist items. There's financial support that they have to prove if the student can't self-fund his or her education. There's a lot of supporting documents to go with that. A transfer is different. With a transfer, the system has to communicate with SEVIS on a regular basis to make sure a school has released his or her SEVIS record from their previous school, so they can attend the new school. So there'll be a different set of fields there, and that was the reasoning behind using record types for differentiating between the flavors of an international student.
No, that's golden. That's beautiful. What I've noticed before, sometimes those schools don't do such a great job at releasing, and part of it is it's a manual process for students you no longer have. Have you considered how to shortcut that at all? I mean, you're shortcutting it with having the fields available, but is it possible that, say, we can map, from a student who is enrolled or is admitted but not enrolled, to automatically release that, or let's say they're admitted, not enrolled this term, and they've let us know what school they're going to go to. So if we have, say, the SEEB code for that school, we know what the account is. Have you considered an export for that, an XML export for that?
Interesting. Well, that's something we can put on the product roadmap. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry to interrupt.
There are a number of different XML definitions available that would cover the different scenarios. So certainly we can accommodate all the different XML exports. Basically, as long as there is a XML specification for it, we could probably accommodate it.
Yeah.
Sweet. That seems to be something that isn't done well, even manually, or isn't done in a timely manner, even manually.
The difficulty there is like XML, it's great in theory, but it was just never really executed too well. And there's not a lot of products out there that really try to support it too well. I mean, even using Salesforce's native XML functionality, I didn't get quite the support I needed. So that's why a lot of this I had to kind of reverse engineer and, bake into a template by hand. To spare you the technical nitty gritty, I kind of baked it into a template by hand that I could use for exports. I could use the similar kind of reverse engineering and then templating process for any other XML definition that is required for any other different sort of SEVIS SEVIS XML import that's required to DHS. Right now, we're basically concentrating on F1, but certainly there's all sorts of other XML definitions that I've seen. So
that's really helpful. Just because, you know, we have such I don't know, we're special snowflakes. We have lots of situations, so that's really helpful to know that it's possible. And once, it sounds like the big hurdle would be getting into partner with a school so that you could set up a sandbox and kind of run through UAT with, you know, creating new records based on sandbox data.
Definitely, but even the UAT process aside, it would be great to partner with a school earlier rather than later, simply because schools have visibility into the process that, you know, myself as a developer, I tend to get tunnel vision sometimes, right? And certainly if there's a lot of process, and it's not to say, as to use your own words, you know, that schools are special snowflakes or anything, they just see things in the trenches that I don't, right? So, I mean, clearly these things need, if these things are communicated, if these needs are communicated, you know, a little earlier in the process, I can just account for them a little earlier. I'd like to think I've thought of everything. Realistically, I know that's not the case. So that's why, you know, partnering with schools or even a variety of schools early on really would make all the difference in the world to building a robust product that anybody can just adopt and use.
And so when you're, and I appreciate how humble that sounded. It is one thing to hear about it, another to live it, right? The pain of living through some of this. That's sensitive of you to think so.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm sure we can all agree that, like, the international student process, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, it looks easy on paper, but it's not, which is why it's been such a stumbling block for everybody for so long. So, I mean, you know, I'd be dishonest if I said that, oh, this is something we can solve overnight. But that said, I think that we're clearly along the road to building a solution that can work for everyone as far as integrating Salesforce and SEVIS together for schools. But definitely getting some schools to, you know, give us additional input, give us additional guidance, and, you know, give us the technical help we need for the UAT process. That certainly would help us a lot.
So I'm just gonna try to, I'll encourage folks to interrupt at any time and ask questions, or feel free to type in the chat window. Those who join us regularly will know I just keep asking questions because I want to get into the nitty gritty of things. So I wanted to kind of start from the very beginning and say, okay, so there's certain fields, certain pieces of data that are required to be to use with SEVIS. And so there are some that we have to get, say, from the passport, you know, that kind of thing. Certainly information associated with their funding, any funding we've provided, for instance, if there's a scholarship or something like that. And to me, that means, of course, it has to be in Salesforce or you're manually looking it up. And so I'm going to make some assumptions here, though most schools probably don't have it in quite this way. But let's say the operations team that's opening the mail from international students gets a copy of the passport and can enter the little code across the bottom so that we have that information, which is required for SEVIS. I don't even remember what that little barcode is called anymore, but I know there is one. And let's say that there is indeed scholarship information provided in Salesforce, and that is related to the contact, and we could map that, both of those fields, into this I-20 object, custom object, whether or not it has to be there. You know, naturally, natively, it could live on another object if it needed to, but we could use a mapper to get it onto this object.
That's
Once
correct.
we have all of the data fields that are required by SEVIS, then that we can run the job, and we will get a response from SEVIS, and that response is updated in Salesforce. And I saw on the detail page itself that there was, you simulated a response. what do you know what data we are able to get back from SEVIS? Because right now most of us, have to go and print the I-20 and mail it out. But a lot of us want to be able to say what date and time it was issued. We want to be able to give them a copy, even though they can't use that. They could use it to make their appointment at the consulate, but they can't actually, they have to have the actual document itself, right? And so can you talk a little bit about what information we can get back from SEVIS? Are you aware of what we can bring back into Salesforce so that we can expose it to the students?
I'm not 100% aware, to be totally frank with you, simply because we haven't gotten that far in the process yet. Based on what I've read in the documentation, they will be giving us back, time it was accepted, time it was reviewed, that sort of thing, as part of the XML that is returned from SEVIS. So we could certainly map those to fields in Salesforce, so you would have that response information there as well. I have heard that and this is just speculative, but I do believe that some documents can be transmitted electronically as well. I'm not entirely sure what they are as of yet, simply because this hasn't been, all fully integrated end-to-end like that. But certainly, if there are documents that are received back from the mainframe in whatever format, they can also be uploaded into Salesforce, and those can be available to students that may log in through a portal. So if we can get the documents back electronically, there is no shortage of ways to upload those documents then to Salesforce and make them available to students directly.
Sweet, yes. I mean, Salesforce is the platform that would allow us to do it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were aware of, what exactly we got back from SEVIS in their response. So
I know theoretically what we get back, but as with anything with the government, theoretical is a long ways away from what is actually sent back right now. So until I see it with my own eyes, I don't want to make anything that people would base any other decisions off of. So.
Great. Kathy,
I appreciate that.
Question. Oh, sorry.
She does. Yeah, I was going to say she does have a question. Kathy Zimmerman does have a question. Can you paint the ideal partner experience you would like to see with the school? That is access to Sandbox, access to the university quote /machine that allows the transfer to SEVIS, admissions, DSO, operational user experience, anything else. She went on to say, everybody knows, Gavin knows that she wants this. I think we all do as soon as we see it. We just need to have the kind of basics and understanding of what the responsibilities of a school would be as a partner. So if you could paint that ideal partner experience as she asked, that would be awesome.
Certainly. I'll have that over to you, Kathy. I've been meaning to reach out to you. It's awesome that she lives like George Mason University is within 20 minutes of a drive from me. So we will talk offline, Kathy. Thank you so much for reaching out with that as an offer.
Yeah, but I mean, just as a quick overall picture, I mean, in an ideal scenario, we would probably need contact with the school's PDSO directly, so they could contact the Department of Homeland Security and authorize the SEVIS sandbox. That is a specific instruction that you need to request separately. In addition, it would be nice to have direct contact with the school's IT department, so we can look into a way to set up their local file system to actually do the last, step 3 requirement of transferring the XML files locally to SEVIS and back, and then back up to Salesforce. So that's something we would need to coordinate with an IT department before we can have like a global, off-the-shelf solution in GitHub or whatever that would be developed as part of the open source sprint. Lastly, having access to perhaps some of the admission staff who do the regular SEVIS forms on a day-to-day basis could be helpful, simply for purposes of, demonstrating, hey, this is how much easier it could be. Can we compare and contrast your current method with, this new method we're developing? So, but as far as core requirements, we would definitely need the PDSO to set up the SEVIS sandbox for us. So
yeah, well said, Chris. So yeah, we would like to have both processes, your existing process and our process, running parallelly for the purpose of studying the efficiencies of the new process.
So just to summarize, and Kathy Zimmerman typed in the chat window, that's where the quote responsibilities cross boundaries at many schools, and they do. So certainly new student recruitment is usually the purview of an admissions office. Admissions can be central or decentral, right? It can be centralized or decentralized. And the PDSO could be in admissions or in an international office, or in some other division entirely. And certainly having IT participating, so that you can set up that file transfer. Those can be very different offices, and so bringing them together to do an effort like this, that's always our challenge with any kind of project. Not that people aren't willing to come together; it's that everybody wants these people to come together for so many different things. Can you estimate about how long you think it would take? What kind of responsibility the school would have in terms of time to implement this?
Once we actually get the sandbox and get everything set up, it shouldn't take much time at all. I mean, in fact, we've had some offers from some schools, IT departments, that if we give you remote access to a server in our environment, would that be sufficient? Definitely. So, I mean, it probably takes just, 10, 15 minutes to set up remote access, to get the PDSO to request the SEVIS sandbox. Sometimes, I haven't done it personally, but certainly it doesn't take too much longer than an email or two, perhaps, or 1 or 2 phone calls. So the actual time investment from the school could be minimal. It really depends on how much effort they want to coordinate with us as far as UAT goes. And just actually testing the solution and helping us evaluate it. But if they wanted to take a hands-off approach, we could certainly work with schools there too.
Okay, so
I do know it's the busy season, especially as far as admissions go right now. So.
Well, I've decided there's no non-busy season.
Yes.
every season is busy now.
Very true, Kathy. Go ahead.
Sure, yeah. So just to kind of summarize to make sure I understood, having access to a server so that we could set up the file transfer, having the PDSO to request from SEVIS a sandbox for testing. You would install both the custom object and the custom mapping solution. Those fields would already all be set up, and the record types would already all be set up. We would just have to then use the mapper from however we have it stored right now in Salesforce to map to the I-20 custom object. And then we could start testing. Is that correct?
That is, yes.
Probably one of the most straightforward implementations ever, assuming you have the data in the system. It's always hard to get data in the system, but assuming you have data in the system, really straightforward implementation, and very little time required. It's really in the mapping and then in the testing, it sounds like.
Right, and the thing is, even the data is fairly easy to come by in that, we could always just generate the data randomly. So,
for testing, I'm saying getting the data in the system can be, sometimes it can be complicated because you're getting it from multiple sources. So that's what I was referencing. Oh, certainly for testing, you can set up test records for it.
Yes. Yes.
So the implementation, the technical implementation itself seems very straightforward and frankly, very little effort in terms of time. Do you also provide any kind of services on top of it? For instance, if something failed, normally we could run a report and have that scheduled, but you may want to, have an alert off of any failure because I-20s are so timely. Do you also, let's say we want to be able to display the I-20 data and perhaps even a copy of the document to students so they don't have to call us or email us. Do you provide those types of services on top of this, or is that something that you think that the school would be responsible for doing?
I mean, while we work with schools in the pilot, certainly we would be able to provide any sort of customization services as well. I mean, myself, I'm a pretty skilled Salesforce developer, so I mean, assuming there's customizations that a school may need, depending on whether or not they could be rolled into the product itself. I mean, the sky's the limit, really, right? Even if it's just like one-off customizations, perhaps for that environment, so the product could best fit, that could certainly be considered as well. So I don't think there's anything necessarily that would stop me. I mean, besides I mean, configuring Salesforce from scratch, perhaps, but I mean, as far as I know, the sky's the limit. So I don't think there's anything off the top of my head that I would necessarily say no to.
Yeah, and a lot of those customizations that you're talking about, Kathy, they are self-service. And if the school is currently using a community, we can configure that for the student to log in and print out their own a copy of the I-20, for example.
Or acceptance letter, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was asking. Sounds to me like another benefit of the pilot is that those types of common things that we would want, perhaps you'd be able to accommodate during the pilot. Yes, they're all native, and yes, an admin can do it. Sometimes we need developers, but even an admin can do most of these. But it would be less work on the school if it were done during the pilot, and you could come up with some kind of recommendations or best practices for schools going forward. So that sounds to me like a great benefit for any school that would like to be part of the pilot. And speaking of the pilot, we kind of already talked about that ideal situation for a partner school. Is there a process you're going through to determine a good fit for a partner school, or a process that a school should go through to become a partner?
Well, proximity is power, right? So if the partnering school is in the DC, Virginia, Philadelphia area, Pennsylvania, Maryland, in that district, we'd prefer that. But we are open to working remotely with any school in anywhere in the United States.
So just selfishly, I'm going to say I like the second part of that answer better than the first part. Since I'm not local, since Maryville is not local. But yeah, we are all national. So you would consider having a school that's not local as one of your first partners for a pilot. Is that correct?
That's
oh yeah, of course. I mean, myself, I would rather work with a school that's remote but responsive as opposed to a school that's local but never picks up the phone. So
that's good, Chris.
That makes sense. Anything else that you want to make sure that we know about what you're doing here? I often ask, is there a cost model that you're following, like a total number of users in the org, or a per user model, or is it a whole solution model? But I don't know that since you're still in the pilot phase, if you've fleshed all those options out. And I also ask generally, if this is just for schools, we probably wouldn't have a nonprofit discount, but is there a nonprofit view into this at all as it relates to cost? Can you speak at all about what the cost model you're considering or that you've already established?
Certainly. So we are in the process of studying our competitors, Banner, Teradata, and PeopleSoft, and we will make sure that whatever that the competitors are charging will be on par with them, or we'll beat their price, and also provide a measured increase in efficiency. So any school that pilots this with us will run parallel processes with the existing system and our system and measure the efficiency and show everyone else that it is possible to turn around the international student inquiry to acceptance, like you said, in less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to keep in mind, especially is regarding the competition, Kathy, is, for example, Illusion. Illusion's system is a complete, soup to nuts system. They include their own local database. They have like everything for you to run. So with Illusion, it's almost like you're buying a separate Salesforce, right? So at that point, you're basically paying the ticket price for Salesforce plus Illusion to handle all these other admissions things. Our goal is if you can keep as much of your admissions processes within Salesforce as possible, including your I-20 records, suddenly you don't have to pay for this additional system to supplement everything. And really, as far as our system goes, I mean, as far as our system goes, it's a lot. Without knowing what the final price would be, I can definitely say that, from a cost savings perspective, you're not paying for a completely new second total system on its own. You're only paying for like a mod or an add-on to Salesforce there. So I don't know if that helps you visualize what the actual difference would be in pricing with a competitor. But
having actually used Banner and its related systems at a former school and colleague now without its related systems and Salesforce, I absolutely can understand that having all of this data in one place and leveraging kind of the native functionality of Salesforce plus the custom functionality of the map and the XML delivery negates the need for all of that other craziness that we have to go through, which is a huge time saver for us. So the idea of running those parallel processes during the testing period to show kind of return on investment as it relates to speed at first, and then international students who actually are converted from admits to enrolled students, and the speed of that is invaluable to organizations who don't often measure those types of things to be able to prove the value of it. Have you already decided what those metrics will be?
Yeah, yes. So, like you mentioned, you took the words right out of my mouth. One of them is how fast can you go from from inquiry to admit. Second is page loads. How long does the admissions rep spend time switching between screens, and the efficiency level of their productivity when switching between screens and trying to get reports out of external systems and exporting spreadsheets. So we'll be calculating the time saved both for the student, where we make it possible for the student to get answers back from the school faster, and also for the admissions team to see the visibility of the entire life cycle from the initial F1 to F2 turning F1 or transfer or change of status. Like each of those areas of international student recruitment will be measured.
So let me just clarify. I think I heard you said from RFI, request for information, from identification, hand raising to admit, but
Correct.
This doesn't affect that at all.
So what happens here is when a student inquires about the school, most schools have an interview process, and that's all for the initial F1 before they send them an acceptance letter. So
right. So you have to be admitted before you're going to get an I-20. And there are some programs that admit once a year on like April 15th. And if they apply in September, that gap will never, ever change. Some have rolling admissions. As soon as you are admissible, a decision is made, and that could take a day, a week, a month, just depending on how quickly you complete your application. So to me, this portion is upon admit, and the speed of it is from the current process and I can give you an example. It used to be a long time ago where I used to work, that upon admit, we'd have to print an admit letter. That admit letter would have to go to the international office. The international office would have to hand enter the information. That hand entered information would result in an I-20 being issued. They'd have to print the I-20, send it back to the admissions office. The admissions office would have to then take a copy of it and mail it to the international student. And if the one person who was involved at any one part of those steps were, I don't know, out of the office or on vacation, it may be delayed beyond just normal delays. So to me, the speed of it is the fact that it's all data and can run automatically on a scheduled job. And to me, I think that metric will be dramatic from admit to when the I-20 is issued, from admit to converting from admit to commit or enrolled.
Correct.
So I just wanted to clarify and make sure I understood that.
Yeah, and correct. And Kathy, you mentioned how paper copies had to be printed out and taken to different departments. If we can digitize that, and also the acceptance letter, if that can be digitized in the form of a DocuSign signature, that would drastically reduce the number of days to mail something out to India or China and get that back to the school.
Most of us have already done the admit messages electronically. Even if some of us still send letters, almost everybody has sped that. It's getting the I-20 done quickly because we haven't had it as data like this before. And being able to transmit that to SEVIS, that speed is a huge benefit that I see. Maybe I'm just totally concentrating on this because that was where my pain was, was getting the I-20 turned around quickly. Because what we found, at least in my previous experience, is that the sooner they get their I-20, the first one who gets them their I-20 is the school they're going to go to, so they get they get their visa right away. And to me, that's the big differentiator. So I was just trying to understand the metrics you were going to track so that you can show kind of the value of this solution.
No, thank you for that feedback. I definitely made a note of it, and that will be part of the metrics that we're going to track, is the speed of which data goes from the recruiting system, which is Salesforce, to SEVIS and back, getting a message back and delivering that message to the student and mobilizing the admissions team to act on the next steps.
Awesome. Well, this is really, to me, so fascinating and a huge leap forward that SEVIS should have taken for us ages ago, but hasn't. The Department of Homeland Security should have, but hasn't.
It moves at the speed of government, so.
Yeah, I know, but this has been needed for so long, and I can't tell you how appreciative international offices across the nation are going to be when they get a chance to look at this. And for those, let's say, who aren't heavy into international recruiting, are you considering using that mapping solution for other purposes, or promoting that mapping solution for other purposes?
We're actually, looking into that right now. To tell you the truth, without going too much into where we're looking at things from a pricing solution, right now, that the mapping solution could easily be applied to a wide variety of solutions. I mean, nonprofit, .com, all sorts of solutions. I mean, one thing we are looking at is, what if the mapping solution is, what the primary paid method here, so to speak, and everything else in terms of supporting the I-20, supporting schools with a variety of methods based on their local file systems to transmit there and back from a Department of Homeland Security. That could be our open source contribution. So really the mapper, as you've seen, that has so much potential, that's kind of the bread and butter here, but everything else on top would be gravy. Okay, that's a bad analogy, but yeah, gravy doesn't go.
Oh, that is great news, and I'm thrilled to hear that. Unfortunately, just because I get so wound up in this has been the fastest hour of the week. I think we are a minute from the top of the hour, so I am going to pause the recording